Hey everybody, welcome to this month's Designs for Sport Masterclass. So excited for this month's education. I'm Jill Lane, one of the sports nutrition specialists at Designs for Sport. If you're new to Designs for Sport, thank you so much for joining. Education is a passion of ours, and you can find all of our monthly masterclasses stored on the education tab of our website, designsforsport.com. We have our podcast relaunching and a host of other educational tools there, so be sure to check all of that out. Each month we try to bring an expert from different areas of the industry, whether it's business, whether it's nutrition, whether it's performance, and all the different sectors of performance. So I'm super excited to have a new colleague of mine on today to talk about an area of sport really that is specialized, and I think she's gonna have a lot to share. I'm going to give a couple minutes for people to jump on and just give a little housekeeping about the platform we use, GoToWebinar. So you guys will be able to ask any questions to Jackie at the end of her presentation. And how you can do that is just by dropping them in the questions or chat section of the GoToWebinar platform that you have up on your screen. You're in listen only mode, and so we can't see you or hear you, but we definitely want your questions along the way. So feel free to drop those in, and at the end, I will share those with Jackie and we'll answer as many as we can when her presentation is over. I'm super excited to have everybody on. Grab your lunch, grab your hydration. If you're getting some cardio in, pop in your earbuds while you're listening. We so appreciate you popping on. Like I said, every month we do a masterclass hosting a variety of different experts just to try to serve this amazing community. And you can find all of those masterclasses on our website at designsforsport.com under the education tab. So I think we're a couple minutes after the hour. I'll just do one more quick reminder, and then I think just in honor of everybody's time and to let Jackie get going on her content, we'll get started. So for those of you that are just joining, thank you so much for taking out the time. You're in listen only mode on GoToWebinar, but we definitely want your questions and your feedback and any inquiries you might have for Jackie or our team at Designs for Sport. You can drop those during her talk in the questions or chat box. I'll be moderating those, and then at the end, I can feed those to Jackie or to my team. I'm Jill with Designs for Sport, one of our sports nutrition specialists. And I would love to know, actually, while we're just waiting one more minute to get started, how you found out about this masterclass. So maybe pop into the chat or questions if you saw it through one of our emails or one of our Instagram posts or someone else's Instagram post, or you heard about it through the grapevine. We would love to know how you heard about this, and please spread the word. We do it every month, and we'd love to have our community grow. So thank you so much for joining. I'm going to just jump into reading a little about Jackie, and because I never want to mess up anybody's bio, I'm going to read it. So bear with me as I kind of look away from the screen. But out of respect to all of our guests, I don't want to mess up all the amazing work they've done in the industry. So let me introduce our guest today, Jackie Kaminski, aka the Fight Nutritionist. If you're not following her on Instagram, that's her handle. I love that. She knows the ins and outs of combat athletes and the unique approach required for optimal recovery. In this masterclass, Jackie's going to go through and get into the weeds of some of the unique needs, specific training requirements, what combat athletes require because of their high risk of deficiency, recovery focus points, and understanding weight class sports as a whole. This is definitely a specialty area. If you know anybody that works with combat athletes or who's getting into it, you certainly can share the link for this class with them afterwards. And Jackie's going to be so gracious at the end of the call to share ways that you can be in touch with her. She's a master level nutritionist instructor at NASM. I'm a world-class organized providing certification and fitness industry. Jackie is a dietitian, which is really important in the sport and performance space. She has a whole host of accolades. Her bio is half the sheet of paper I'm holding up, and I think once you hear what she has to say, you will understand why. So because people want to hear from you, Jackie, I'm just going to turn off my camera, turn off my mic, and let you get to your content. Thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us today. I know you have a lot going on, your business is growing, and so we really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. I don't know how to, go off from that. Oops, go back to my screen 1 second. There you go back in present mode. Sorry about that. So yeah, to get started, my name is Jackie. I'm already noticing a typo on my first slide here, so please ignore that. It's not RND, it's RDN, Registered Dietitian Nutritionist. But yeah, so I'm Jackie, I'm a dietitian, and I am the Fight Nutritionist. And today I'm going to talk to you guys about combat sports specifically, because this is a niche that I decided to go into. If you have no idea what combat sports entails, well, then you're in for a treat, because I'm going to give you the ins and outs and the reality of working with these types of athletes. If you're involved in the sport or interested in getting involved in the sport, I'm hoping that, this information that I'm going to share with you is going to be really eye-opening, because they are a really interesting cohort of athletes to work with compared to other groups. So before getting into it, just kind of wanted to give you more of a background on who I am. So, I am a registered dietitian. I have my master's in sports nutrition and exercise physiology from Florida State University. Go Noles. And I have my undergrad in dietetics, so that's what really led me on the road to becoming a dietitian, which I do believe is really important, especially within combat sports. Once we get into it and you realize the level of science and expertise that is required to help these athletes, to me, it's really important that people do have a proper level of education before getting involved in this. There's way too many people in the field of nutrition just alone outside of combat sports that probably shouldn't really be dispensing advice all the time. So to me, a proper education is really important. But outside of that, so going through school, I always knew I wanted to work with athletes, but the question was, what type of athletes did I want to work with? Everyone always gravitated towards the major sports, so football, baseball, basketball, which was all great and dandy. Those sports did appeal to me. I did love football. However, they were really highly competitive, and at the time I didn't think that I would be super into just kind of starting at the bottom and having to work my way up to the top and having to compete against so many other people. So during my master's, I had to get a summer internship, and at the time I just started taking up a kickboxing class, and it's by no means a real kickboxing class. It was like 9 rounds, which I don't know if anyone's familiar with or if you have them in wherever you live, but it's like a kickboxing fitness class. But anyways, at the time I was taking that class, and it just kind of sparked an interest because I didn't know anything about fighting. I mean, I knew what UFC was, I knew what boxing was, but I didn't know anything about the sports. And kind of getting into this new training, it just kind of sparked a curiosity. I was like, I wonder if combat athletes have really interesting nutritional needs. And so that summer I hopped on my computer and I found an internship at the UFC Performance Institute's, the headquarters out in Las Vegas. And I miraculously landed this internship. I don't know how, because during my interview, I literally said I know nothing about combat sports, but I'm so eager to learn. And that's really just what made me fall in love with the sport, was my experience there. I'll talk to you guys a little bit more why, but what really kind of solidified my love for it was the complexity of the sport and the athletes. I mean, some of the most incredible athletes I've ever seen in my life, and they're so humbled and they're so great to work with. But the complexity of the sport is really what spoke to me in terms of how I could be such an influential figure in this space and really help people. So once I moved back home to sunny South Florida, love it here, it's super great, I decided to start my business after I graduated in March of 2020. So my company, The Fight Nutritionist, is my own private practice. And yes, if you are familiar with the lovely pandemic that hit us back, a few years ago now, it was in March of 2020. So when the world shut down is when I decided to start my business. I thought it was a fantastic idea. And it actually did turn out to be a fantastic idea, because I was able to grow really quickly. And believe it or not, a lot of these athletes were still training, and UFC, I think, was the first sport to start putting on shows again during COVID. And so since then, I've had the pleasure to work with such a wide range of athletes. I don't just work with combat athletes, it's just my niche. But as far as combat athletes, I mean, I've worked with some of the most skilled and high-leveled amateurs that have now, they're winning world championships. I've worked with lower level pros that have kind of gone through the ranks and made it up to title fights. I've worked with world champions, you know, boxing, MMA, BKFC as of lately. I got into that. So it's really been such an incredible journey, and I'm really grateful. But what I want to go over with you guys is, if you aren't familiar with combat sports, I really want to kind of dive into what makes combat athletes different than other athletes. So if we're kind of looking here on the left side of the screen, a combat athlete is, you know, professional elite level athlete. Like every other athlete, they have very high training volumes, very high training demands. They're training anywhere between 2 to 4 times a day. Sometimes the crazy ones train even more. And they need to be able to maintain and execute high levels of performance, which means that recovery is super huge and ensuring their continuous high level output. And again, from a nutritional standpoint, whether it's nutrition, whether you're a strength conditioning coach, we want to do everything in our power to prevent injury, prevention, support a healthy athlete, a healthy body. So again, no matter what athlete you work with, those are always really, you know, going to be the main focuses. However, when we cross over the bridge to working with this cohort of combat athletes, we need to be able to balance all of their energy needs and training demands, their nutrition, their performance, and their recovery, and try and prevent them from getting injured while getting them to lose weight. So if we're looking here on the right side, this is what really starts to make weight class sports or combat athletes different, is that they have to make a very specific weight in order to compete. And I'm not talking weight loss like, oh, it's just 3 or 5 pounds. I'm talking like 18% of their body weight in a matter of 6 to 8 weeks. So we're losing massive amounts of weight in really short time periods. So what happens is that because of that, now we have to get into practices that are maybe a little counterintuitive to what we would be healthy, you know, would be essentially healthy for a typical person, let alone an athlete. And this is where the dichotomy really exists with weight class sports, is that we're doing things that are really counterintuitive to performance and recovery and training. So we're getting them to lose massive amounts of weight, which means that we have to purposely restrict calories or put them in pretty large calorie deficits. We have to do acute weight loss. So what that goes into, and I'll explain that a little bit more thoroughly in a second. I'll go into more detail on that, but we have to purposefully dehydrate them. I mean, name another sport where you have to purposely dehydrate somebody. Anyone in this field knows that dehydration is not good. I mean, you know, just losing 2% of your body weight decreases aerobic performance. Anything above 5%, oh my God, like your just energy is going to plummet. You're increasing risk for concussion, and we're doing so many things that are just not great for the body. But guess what? We got to do it in this sport. So because of that, and because these athletes are engaging in, you know, honestly, like life-threatening practices, now as a practitioner, I need to, and other people in my position, we're trying to research ways to make these practices safer. So I put in heat acclimation here, which is essentially a tactic that we get combat athletes to practice. Usually about a month's time frame before they have to do any sort of cut. And essentially what that means is that we get them to sit, so for example, in a sauna, in really hot environments. So for anywhere between 30 to 40 minutes at one time. And essentially by doing these heat exposures continuously, it allows the body to, essentially in the word, acclimate to that scenario. So responses that, you know, stress responses like elevated heart rate because you're sweating more, you know, that begins to kind of turn up. So heat acclimating can kind of help lower, you know, heart rate levels. It increases sweat responses. It increases sweat onset. So you become more acclimated to this hot environment. Mentally, it allows them to be able to deal with it. And over time, essentially the whole practice is to make sweating, make you really, really good at sweating, which is really important for the weight cut, which I'll get into in a second. Sport culture, I did list sport culture here. I mean, every sport is going to have a sport culture, but in the world of combat sports, especially weight class sports, it's still very nuanced. It's a very new field in terms of like research and practitioners trying to come in here and make it better. I feel like football, basketball, baseball, major sports leagues, they seem to have developed a lot more practices that aren't so ingrained in old thoughts, old beliefs. That's where a lot of the research does happen. So they're continuously like, up to date with what's the latest, what's the best thing for this athlete. Weight class sports, especially boxing, I mean, they have really old school methods of cutting weight. So, putting on trash bags, they're running, 5 to 7 miles every day on top of all of their training. They're in the gym with these like crazy sweatsuits, and they just, they don't eat all day. And that's just the culture of the sport, and that's so still heavily ingrained in a lot of these coaches, a lot of these athletes, and it's really hard to kind of get them to move away from that and see better ways about going about, cutting weight. And so again, the sport culture, you have to battle that, on top of everything else that you're trying to handle. And moreover, in terms of how weight class sports are different than other sports, is that we're doing continuous body composition manipulation. And what I mean by that is that, again, these guys are losing massive amounts of weight, but it's in a really cyclical nature. So let's say we have, maybe a high level pro, and they fight anywhere between 1 to 3 times per year. So in a short time period, they're losing a ton of weight, and then they gain it back, and then they lose it again, and then they gain it back. And that might not happen all the time, but a few times a year. But you could have a situation where you're with like a high school or college wrestler, and now we're having to lose massive amounts of weight on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. So it's continuous body composition manipulation. It's not just, hey, a couple pounds here this season, or you put on some weight during off season and now we got to lose it. No, it's like it's continuous. It's back to back to back. So, and again, we know that that's not always the healthiest, but again, how do we manage that? So kind of before getting into a little bit more about needs for combat athletes, let's talk about the weight class sport season. So fight sports don't really have seasons. I mean, I guess it depends on which one you're referring to. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm probably just going to mainly refer to like MMA and boxing. So for these guys, typically I consider off season to be any time period between fights. So ideally, any goal in an off season is to get these fighters to maintain a healthy walk around weight and consume adequate calories to meet their training demands, because ideally we can get them to maintain a walk around weight as close to their fight weight as possible. We don't have to undergo this cyclical nature of weight gain and weight loss every single time we get involved in a camp. However, the reality is that that almost never happens. Over my few years of practice, I've only had a few select athletes that like to work with me year round to maintain that healthy walk around weight. But the majority of them leave me after every fight camp. They do whatever they want, they eat whatever they want, and they gain a ton of weight back. So by the time they hit me up again for a fight camp, we got to lose all this weight again. And I'm like, oh my God, why are you making my job so difficult? But again, just the reality of the situation. To them, this is like their break, because camp, as you can see here, once we enter camp, this time period is typically 6 to 8 weeks, can be as short as 4, but sometimes it's about 12 weeks. And this is where they get really dialed in. They have to be really strict with themselves, because again, we do have to lose quite a significant amount of weight in order to hit this scale weight. So fight camp entails is a period of time essentially where training in volume and intensity is like at its peak. So they're training 3 to 4 times a day. They're, sparring, they're running, they're doing strength conditioning, they're go, go, go all the time. And this is the time period where we start to initiate a diet. So we have to implement a calorie deficit. Again, every athlete, that deficit will be different depending on how much weight loss we have to achieve on a weekly basis. But again, we're limiting food to some extent to initiate weekly weight loss. And ideally, the goal is to target fat loss while maintaining or minimizing lean body mass losses. Now, when it comes to planning out a weight cut for these fighters, we automatically factor in roughly 2 to 3 pounds of muscle loss over the duration of a camp. I've seen some fighters that we can maintain all their lean muscle from the start. Others, we lose close to 8 pounds of muscle. It really just depends. But again, they're training at really high volumes and we're implementing a calorie deficit. So the real goal is to just minimize lean body mass losses, and I'll explain why in a second. So the next phase of a fighter's season, so fight camp would be like main bulk of a whole camp period. And then within camp, we have two major time points. We have fight week and fight day. And fight week is the period of time where we're now implementing what we call acute weight loss tactics. So fight week is no more than 7 days time, usually 5 to 7 days. Training volume is significantly reduced because what we are doing is that we are strategically lowering calories, we are decreasing carbohydrate intake, we are reducing sodium intake, and we're even reducing fiber intake. And the whole point of this is to essentially eliminate stores of extra water within the muscles and within the body. So that's kind of going back to those that target during fight camp right here of focusing on fat loss versus muscle loss, because muscle holds glycogen, it holds water, and water is influenced by sodium levels and even fiber in the gut. So if we can target fat loss, then we can remove a lot of body mass that isn't necessarily like, you know, it's not important, but essentially at the end of the day, when we get to fight week, we can't manipulate body fat. There's nothing in body fat that we can manipulate from dietary strategies. So we really want to focus on losing fat as much as possible. So when it comes to fight week, all of the rest of the weight that we're manipulating is essentially water weight. That's all we're doing, is just taking out water from the body, making these fighters reach their extremes. So when we come time to the weight cut, hopefully we've implemented everything correctly, the athlete is responding well, and now we don't have to cut more than 5% of their body weight 24 hours prior to this weigh-in time. So the weigh-in time is like the most acute period where they are at this weight, but we still have to get them there. So we're really depleting them again, beating their bodies up, and expecting them to be a high-performing athlete 36 hours after that time period, which is absolutely nuts. And the weight cuts, I mean, I've had weight cuts that are really easy. So some of them take a couple hours. Maybe they only have to cut 5 pounds, no problem. But the reality is that sometimes you just get people who don't respond well, they're overeager, they want to achieve lower weight classes, or just, you try and do everything perfect as a practitioner, and everything that can go wrong will go wrong, and you can't prepare for it. And so I've had cuts, like I said, that are really easy, but I've also had weight cuts that, took upwards of 14 hours time. So, we're starting from the day before up until the next morning, all through the night, maybe 15 pounds. I think the biggest one I've done is like 20 pounds in one night. And again, like, these athletes are pushing their bodies to like their absolute extremes, to the point of which, some of them have ended up in the hospital with kidney failure because of it, because they're so dehydrated. So just to give you some perspective of what these athletes are putting themselves through. And then after they weigh in, hopefully successfully, no major consequences of the cut have occurred, then we can focus on the rehydration and refueling period. And essentially, this is now where we're very strategically, again, re-implementing carbohydrates, fluids, sodium, and other nutrients to help them regain all this weight that we acutely depleted during fight week. So ideally, the goal when it comes to kind of tracking the weight loss for these fighters is that by the start of fight week, we ideally don't want them more than like 8 to 10% above their fight weight. So by the time, that's the start of fight week, and then we get them down to their weigh-in weight, they usually tend to rehydrate and put back that weight. So let's say 45er starts their cut at, I don't know, 160 pounds. They weigh in at 45. I would expect them to be, after, a full day of rehydrating, to be back at 160 pounds. So again, that weigh-in weight is the most acute period of time that they're actually at that weight. But then again, like I said, they basically kill themselves getting to this weight, they rehydrate, and then have to be superior on fight day, which is kind of self-explanatory. It's the main competition day that they've been preparing for this whole time. So that being said, here's just like a typical training schedule of maybe some athletes. So one of my boxers, for example, and boxers and MMA, completely different cultures and the way that they train, how the coaching is done. It's very interesting. I love both of them to death, but yeah, it's completely different. But anyways, I would say boxers are much more traditional. So this is an example of one of my athletes. Every morning they wake up at 6 a.m., they run 3 to 5 miles. By 1 p.m., they're at the gym doing boxing drills or sparring. So usually sparring is either 2 or 3 times a week, alternates days. And then by the evening time, they usually have a strength and conditioning session once or twice a week. You know, versus MMA, which they tend to be much more active because they have to practice a few, a lot more disciplines than just one. Boxing is just one discipline. So for example, 6 a.m. light jog or yoga, 10 a.m. they have their S&C, 1 p.m. is wrestling, 6:30 p.m. striking, and those evening sessions every single day will alternate based on the discipline that they're trying to practice. So maybe it's boxing, maybe it's wrestling, maybe it's striking, maybe it's kickboxing, Muay Thai, whatever it is. So that will alternate throughout the week, but you can see that, again, lots of training that these guys are doing. So I always like to, as a practitioner, have all my athletes rate the scale or rate the intensity of their workouts. And I kind of just give them my own version of an RPE scale. I say, all right, if you had to rate your workout on a level from 0 to 10, 0 being like, you're not doing anything, it's like a yoga class, super easy, you're walking all day, no problem at all, to 10 being like full blown, exhausted, like you're crawling to your car because you're like dead. That was like the hardest workout of your life. So I like to use this RPE scale that I've kind of, that I use with my athletes to kind of gauge the intensity so I know how much they're actually doing. And in turn, that gives me more information to know how much I need to feed them on a daily basis, especially before and after those sessions, to ensure they have good energy, proper recovery. Oops, went the wrong way. Okay, so what health risks are combat athletes facing? Oops, so sorry. I think I missed a slide. Or maybe it's not listed here. Oh, sorry, I'm getting lost. I'll continue. So what are the health risks that all combat athletes are facing? So I wanted to include the red S, or relative energy deficiency and sport chart right here, because like I said, we have really high performing athletes, but now we are purposefully decreasing calorie intake. So we're kind of creating the perfect scenario for some malnutrition. Okay, and so we all know that whether it's over exercising, which again, these athletes are, exercising a lot, but we can't feed them to match their energy demands because we have to elicit weight loss. So this energy deficiency is really kind of coming more from a lack of food, a lack of calories, and culturally, a lot of these athletes significantly undereat, and I'll get into that in a second. We do know kind of the consequences of not eating enough for a high-performing athlete. So, over time, we are reducing metabolic function. So it's been documented in certain case studies, even with a few combat athletes, that these extensive weight cuts and super low calorie intake decreases thyroid hormone, which essentially decreases their metabolism and resting metabolic rate. If we're looking at hormones, it's been shown that it significantly decreases testosterone levels, and continuous weight cuts that are really extensive over time seem to have permanent damage on testosterone levels in men. We know that in females that, if we're not consuming enough calories, the first thing to shut down is our hormone system. So no more period, no more menstrual function, and over time that's going to lead to decreases in bone mineral density. So now we're talking about increased fracture risk, which is definitely no bueno in combat sports when they're punching and kicking each other with their bare hands and legs and feet and elbows and whatever else they have. And again, it just becomes a cascade that one falls on top of the other of all these negative consequences of not eating enough. So let me go here. So again, we're talking about low energy availability, and it really is a real thing. So when we're talking about energy availability, we're talking about energy available to sustain physiological function after subtracting the energetic cost of exercise. This is how we're referencing this term. And in an athletic setting, we consider optimal energy availability to be roughly greater than 40 to 45 calories per kilogram of fat-free mass per day for both females and males. And more often than not, it has been documented that most combat athletes consume between 5 to 25 calories per kilogram of fat-free mass, which is already below like extreme low energy availability levels. Like it's absolutely nuts. And I don't know how they have not killed themselves with all the training that they're doing and how they can still even perform consuming so few calories. But it is a real issue. And it's something that I have to keep in mind all the time, and something that I'm really trying to prevent, because again, culturally, these guys are terrified, girls too, they're terrified of eating because they have to lose massive amounts of weight. And it does also breed a lot of, disordered eating patterns and eating disorders within the sport. So from a practitioner standpoint, what am I always trying to focus on? So kind of tying that all together, what nutrient deficiency risks do combat athletes face? Haha, all of them, obviously. And I say that jokingly, but it is serious. I mean, if we're training at really high volumes and we can't feed you to meet your training demands or energy demands, and we have to purposefully initiate calorie deficits, we definitely are going to create an environment for deficiency risk. It's definitely going to happen. I mean, obviously, we want to minimize that as much as possible. And starting now, I'm going to start telling you how I start to prioritize what's the most important. So what you see right here is just my kind of short list, because the reality of working with these athletes is that we have to prioritize what's important. So perfect scenario is that we have an athlete that is close to their fight weight, and that weekly weight loss, we only have to initiate a 500 to 700 calorie deficit per week, no problem. They're feeling really strong, they're feeling really great, the weight cut's super easy, and that whole focus of the camp, we can actually really focus on performance and making sure that they are getting all the nutrition, the energy, and the recovery they need. However, that's not always the case. Sometimes the focus is the weight loss. They are just way too heavy coming into camp. They have to make this weight. There's a lot on the line for them. And so we have to be even more restrictive with what we give them, which means that they still have to train at high levels, but we're telling them, hey, like, you can't really focus on performance during this camp, or you're going, like, the consequence of having to lose all this weight because you want to make this weight class but are too heavy is that you're going to feel like crap. So you are going to be at higher risk for injury. You're going to be at higher risk for sickness. You're going to feel more sore. You're not going to feel your absolute best during the entirety of this camp, and sometimes just the conversation. So in those scenarios, for me, I need to start prioritizing with every athlete. And again, this is going to be a case-by-case basis. What is the most important? But if we're just doing kind of like a blank across the board, my top recommendations for immediate focuses are: 1, vitamin D. Vitamin D is already just a major deficiency across the board for population in total, but especially athletes. And athletes already, their needs for vitamins and minerals are already twice, if not 3 times as high than the average individual. And combat athletes spend the majority of their training indoors. So we definitely want to make sure that they're getting plenty of vitamin D. Iron is also another really important one. We know that low iron is associated with weakness, fatigue, decreased exercise performance, and obviously this is a really big concern with low-calorie diets, especially for my females, for ensuring healthy menstrual function. Electrolytes, these athletes, not only are we training them to be really great sweaters, but a lot of them just are going to have a lot of sweat output on a daily basis with all the training that they're doing. And we all know that usually the first sign of decreased performance is due to fluid loss and being dehydrated, moreover than an energy fueling issue. So we want to make sure that we're replacing electrolytes regularly on a daily basis. And last but not least, magnesium, which kind of falls into that category. Again, magnesium is involved in over 300 metabolic reactions. It's especially important for energy production and muscle function. So, and again, athletes with their high sweat rates, especially combat athletes, we want to ensure that they're getting plenty of this on a daily basis. And again, because they're elite level athletes, their needs are already higher than the majority of individuals. So tying everything back to the whole purpose of this webinar, this presentation, is we're talking about recovery needs in combat sports. And the reason I want to emphasize recovery so much is because recovery to me is truly the most important foundation that we need to create for not only combat athletes, all athletes in general, but especially combat athletes, because we cannot build upon this foundation, or if we do, it'll crumble if we do not have a strong base. And again, these athletes are performing at extremely high levels. They're pushing their bodies to the absolute extremes. And I want to make sure that they can continue to do that over and over and over again by minimizing at the same time, risk of injury, risk of sickness, risk of soreness, because if they can't continue to perform at a high level, then they're going to be no good come fight time. So recovery is the most important thing and the biggest focus for me when it comes to this specific cohort of athletes. And then again, the question, especially when we're trying to prioritize what we want to focus on when it comes to recovery, now is a conversation of, or the big debate, do we get it from food or do we get it from supplements? So I am a big food first mentality. I try to get food in as much as possible, and whole foods that being, because again, I just think it's better to get everything from food versus supplements, but I will get into why supplements are so great in a second. But if we're talking about recovery needs, most important thing that I hammer into every single one of my clients, every single one of my fighters, is protein. Protein, protein, protein. We need those amino acids. We need muscle recovery, because what are they working out all day on a daily basis? They're muscles. And again, we want to preserve those muscles as much as possible under the really catabolic conditions that we are creating. So we are giving them diets super rich in beef, fish, chicken, salmon, whatever it is. I have recently had a vegan boxer, so finding his protein sources are a little bit more difficult. But again, that was a major priority for him because he lost way too much muscle over the duration of a camp, and I wanted to prevent that. So protein, protein, protein. We are always feeding protein as much as possible. There is never a time from out of camp to the start of camp to even fight week that we are not feeding high protein. Electrolytes. So again, we want to replace electrolytes on a daily basis. So if we're opting for whole food sources, coconut waters, bananas, really rich in potassium, avocados, using salted nuts, seeds, legumes, cooking meats in chicken broth, or making soups, these would be more whole food natural alternatives to getting that. Immune boosters, getting plenty of B vitamins, vitamin D, zinc, everything to help build a strong immune system. So we want to make sure we're getting really rich levels of those vitamins and minerals. So focusing a lot, I give a lot of salmon. We can find these nutrients in beef, different animal meats, dark leafy greens. Again, promoting a really healthy environment. And last but not least, our antioxidants. These athletes, again, are training at really high volumes, so they're kind of creating a lot of inflammation in the body. And yes, we need some inflammation to create some cellular and metabolic adaptations, but too much is what leads them to being really sore and then overtrained, and we can't have that. So we want to focus on a high antioxidant rich diet. Now, excuse me. Food first is great, love it, but if anyone else is a dietitian or nutritionist in the field, one, we know that our food supply is not so rich in nutrients as it used to be, meaning that our soil quality has significantly diminished or decreased, and a lot of foods that we want to get good nutrients from may not be as rich as they once were. Again, we have to initiate calorie deficits at some point. So that means certain foods we have to eliminate. So for example, let's say that we have to initiate an 1,000 calorie, 1,200 calorie deficit, And we want to make sure that we're prioritizing those calories from protein, because that's number one focus, but also carbohydrates during camp, because that's what's feeding their energy. Combat sports, it's a very, everything that they do requires very glycolytic pathways, which means that carbs are going to be the only thing to fuel them. So we want to prioritize carbs and protein, which means that we kind of have to cut out fat to an extent, or we tend to make that a little bit lower. So if we do that, then maybe we can't really do so much salmon. We're using egg whites instead of eggs. Maybe we're cutting out beef, nuts, avocados, and all of those foods also contain really rich sources of, vitamins that help boost immunity. So we're talking about zinc, we're talking about iron, we're talking about anti-inflammatory nutrients. So what do we do in that case? Well, that is when we turn to supplements. So I obviously, like I said, I'm a food first person, but supplements to me, especially within combat sports, are so great because they just really fill in the gaps of what we aren't able to attain from food. And again, when we have to purposefully initiate calorie deficits, especially extreme ones, and we want to prioritize whole foods, with protein and carbohydrates, we might be neglecting some major nutrients that are going to be key to building this base of recovery that we want to give them. So some supplements that I wanted to highlight and share with you guys. And again, going through supplements and talking about foods, I do want to talk about every case scenario. Obviously, like any person here could probably come up with a list of supplements and a list of food for these types of athletes to have to create a perfect scenario. But the reality is that they're not going to take a CVS pill pharmacy every single day on a daily basis. They barely adhere to any diet plan that you give them. Okay, so we do want to make sure that we are being really thoughtful with the recommendations that we're giving, and we're prioritizing items that are specifically needed for that athlete. So I'm going to go through this list, and a lot of you might pick and choose or say all of them, but the reality is, like, if you can get them to commit to taking like 2 or 3, that is the reality of kind of what's going to happen. So again, my focus is recovery. This is the base that we need to focus on. So I'm always giving protein powders or essential amino acids. Designed for sport has a great line. Their amino complex, their beef protein, which for me has now become a personal favorite because I am personally intolerant to whey products, so it's been really nice. But I'm feeding these guys protein powders, essential amino acids as much as possible. I tell them that there is absolutely no limit that you can have, even if you are consuming excess calories per day, but straight from protein, that's not going to hinder our weight loss goals on a weekly basis. So anything that you can kind of tell them, hey, you can have as much of this as you want, oh my God, #1 priority. So I'm always emphasizing these. So again, focusing on muscle recovery, reduce inflammation, retaining lean mass, soreness reduction, so they can continue to perform at high levels and keep that level of intensity up on a daily basis. My #2 recommendation is creatine, and I think Design for Sport is coming out with their own supplement pretty soon, which I'm very excited about. But creatine, if you guys are familiar with creatine, I'm not going to get into it. It obviously has so many benefits from a performance standpoint, so increased muscle, all this stuff. But I look at creatine for combat athletes from a recovery standpoint. So if we can get them to consume creatine in their water during or even after a workout, it's going to enhance absorption of fluids, electrolytes, carbohydrates. Creatine does improve recovery. It obviously helps build lean body mass, but in this instance where we're in a really catabolic environment, maybe we're retaining that lean body mass as much as possible. Creatine also has neuroprotective effects. Again, for me, a really important aspect, especially for combat sports. Concussions are a real thing. We want to prevent that as much as possible. And again, creatine actually does help enhance mental clarity when tired or sleep deprived. So again, fighting is a very mental sport, and it's very reactive. I mean, we're talking like split second that they have to be able to see something coming and react. So anything that we kind of can do to help them on that front, also really important. But again, main focus is just making sure that we're enhancing the recovery process. Again, like I've mentioned a bunch of times, we want to make sure they're getting plenty of electrolytes on a daily basis because they're losing so much fluids. Part of recovery is hydrating appropriately. So we want to make sure that we're giving them all the sodium that they're losing, potassium, calcium, magnesium, all of it, to make sure that they're feeling good during training, and replacing all the fluids that they've lost during their workouts when they're covered in sweet sweat and Abilene and all their sauna suits when it's like 100 degrees in the gym. Moving on, and couple other supplements that I'm really big on. My newest favorite, I learned about this supplement at a conference last year, and I have every single one of my athletes on it. The research around it is phenomenal. I'm so obsessed with it. I have every single one of my fighters on it, and that's astaxanthin. And again, from a recovery standpoint, because I want to focus so much on helping fight the inflammation and the damage that these athletes are doing to their body on a daily basis. So this is the most potent antioxidant that we have on the market. And they've even shown in studies, there was one that within soccer players that after 4 weeks of taking the supplement, the control group had like a 70% increase in CRP levels, which is a marker of muscle inflammation. And the astaxanthin group had like virtually no increases in CRP levels. Like it was nothing. Over time, it's shown to improve energy levels. And what it's doing is it's increasing the mitochondrial capacity to handle reactive oxygen species. So any damage that's occurring, not from like stress, like mental stress, it has to be like physical stress, like physical exercise that these guys are doing. It's helping the body fight that and recover so much quicker. Again, to me, recovery is super, super important. And I want to prioritize what's going to be the best thing to give them, and what's the easiest thing to give them. And again, that's astaxanthin, and I'm picking that over any omega-3 or anything, any day of the week. Secondly, vitamin D, like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, and we're talking about major nutrient deficiencies. In combat athletes, vitamin D is probably going to make the top of my list. Again, they're indoors, they're not spending a lot of time outside, maybe they're not eating enough food, maybe now we have to restrict fat, and vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin, so can't get it from there. So now again, we're creating an environment for some serious vitamin D deficiency. And vitamin D is important for more than just bone health. It's a major antioxidant in the body. It's really important for protein synthesis and regeneration. So from a recovery perspective, vitamin D is really important. And it's really important in maintaining immune function, super crucial. Last but not least, zinc, again. And we're talking from a recovery standpoint, maintaining a healthy immune function is going to be really important. If these guys are getting sick, then they can't train. And everyone knows that when you're sick, you feel like crap. And so we want to make sure that we're protecting their immune system as much as possible, especially since, again, we're creating an environment that to get sick is going to be so easy. We're not eating enough, we're overtraining, we're not getting all the nutrients we need from our diet. So we want to make sure that we're protecting that aspect of it as much as possible. And then again, from an injury prevention standpoint, wound healing, but especially again, muscle recovery. If you guys haven't seen the pattern and all the supplements that I usually pick, then I'm going to tell you right now, muscle recovery. And last but not least, the main recovery prescription that you cannot feed somebody, you cannot bottle and put it in a, you cannot bottle it up and put it in a pill, but something that we need to emphasize, not just in combat athletes, but all athletes, but something that I'm really, really big on, and it's so overlooked, is sleep. Sleep is going to be so essential. Again, for your high training volumes, this is the time period where your body is able to really recover and undo all the damage that was just done from the day. It's the one time period where, yeah, again, is like the most important time period for your body to actually recover. But again, with combat athletes, what happens? They have late training schedules, and now their nervous system is all activated and they can't wind down, but then they have to get up early for a run or for another training. So what do we recommend? some sort of sleep supplement. Designed for Sports has a great one on the line. I use this a lot with my athletes actually, is their sleep complex. So it's got roughly 3 grams of melatonin, which is a pretty solid dose, but it's also combined with a bunch of other vitamins and agents that kind of help with sleep. So the 5-HTP, chamomile, valerian root. So, you know, anytime if you want to prescribe this to your athletes, or what I do with mine, if they have trouble sleeping, I usually say, hey, take this 30 minutes before you go to bed, and you should be pretty solid, and hopefully that helps you get to bed. Have a restful sleep throughout the night. So just some key takeaways, if that was a lot of information for you, but kind of getting back to the root of the whole presentation is, one, when it comes to combat athletes, recovery is the foundation to being successful. To me, recovery is the most important aspect of any performance routine. We need to lay that foundation and make sure that foundation is really strong before we ever try to build upon it. Due to extremely high training volumes, you know, purposefully dehydrating athletes, purposely reducing calorie intake, you know, pushing their bodies to the literal absolute extremes, athletes are at risk for facing combat athletes are at risk for facing many nutrient deficiencies. And so when we talk about helping out these athletes from a nutritional standpoint, what we want to focus on, making sure that they're, you know, eating right foods at the right time, focusing on the recovery. What we want to do is prescribe nutrient dense foods as much as possible to minimize that nutrient deficiency risk. But again, how I alluded to earlier in the presentation, we have to prioritize what that nutrients exactly is going to be. I like to say that with this cohort of athletes, we're never maximizing performance. We're never maximizing recovery. We can't use that word. And we can't use that word because, again, we have to purposefully initiate deficits to an extent to elicit weekly weight loss. So the word I like to use all the time is optimize. My key word is, let me optimize you in your current state. And what that means is that we have to pick our battles to ensure that optimal health and optimal performance. You are never going to get a combat athlete or any athletes to adhere to a program you're prescribing 100% of the time. So we got to pick our battles. Can we get them to eat X, Y, and Z foods, or do supplements have to be the route that we have to take because they're just on the go all the time? They don't have time to sit down and eat, but we got to get something in them and we got to get it in now. So what is the easier route? And last but not least, supplements are great for filling in nutrient gaps that we cannot obtain from whole foods, especially during major calorie deficits. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you guys so much for listening in. I hope you learned a lot. Ready to take some questions, and if anyone, you know, wants to follow me on Instagram or reach out to me personally, some of my information is right here. And so Jill, I think ready to take some questions if you're ready for that.
Thank you so much, Jackie. I loved your slides. I mean, thank you for us visual learners for putting all of that together in such a way that we could see it all nicely. That was, there's a lot that goes into the work that you do, clearly. And so I think this was, you know, just a great place for people who are learning new things to start, and those who are in the field to learn from an expert. So I've been getting texted a few questions, so I'm going to go off of those first. And then just as a reminder, for those of you still on, you can drop a question in the questions or chat section of the GoToWebinar platform control panel. So a couple things. I had someone ask, if you see, just as someone on the inside of, you know, the community of different types of combat sports, you mentioned this a couple times during your presentation, anything changing in the culture regarding the drastic weight cutting or staying more near the fight weight, if you will, so that there aren't as many swings in weight, or that prep for weight fighting isn't so drastic? Like, is there anything you're noticing in the community, or is it just this is kind of the way it's always been and how it's going to stay?
I mean, I would say it's not like these guys aren't oblivious to what these weight cuts do. Like they know it's, it's a lot. They know they don't feel good. They know it's not great for them. They just the culture is that they just do it. It's just like one of those things that they just think is normal. I would say, like, as of lately, and I would kind of credit a lot of the change to the UFC Performance Institute, because since they've been able to put out the research, and since the UFC especially, those athletes have access to them, I think it's becoming more known that, weight cutting is really dangerous and we need to change the way we go about it. But I do. So the answer is yes. I do see the culture changing. I see a lot of these athletes, they are getting nutritionists, they are getting specialists to be a part of their team to kind of help them with that. But I would say you are going to get like a big lot of them too that are just ingrained in their old ways. It depends what sport you're in. I would say MMA, probably they do tend to do bigger weight cuts. Boxing doesn't have as big of a weight cut. So when I'm working with these types of athletes, I would say MMA love to do these like huge weight cuts the night before. Boxing, like they want to be within a couple pounds before fight night. They don't like to do big weight cuts. But so I would say MMA probably has more professionals that are kind of like opening everyone's eyes and getting them to realize that they need to take it more seriously. I think boxing is a little bit newer, but since I've been working with more boxers, I would say it's becoming more known, more apparent. And again, they do want to get health professionals on their team to help them do this the healthiest way possible.
Amazing. Great. I have so maybe like 3 or 4 more questions. That's great. Thanks for all of you who've been popping some in. Nicole asked, what is it that you know that nobody knows that upsets you and you wish people knew when it comes to nutrition? So is there something on the inside, especially as, again, I flubbed up and really didn't give you the accolades that are due. You have your master's degree and you are a dietitian. And so, you have a really solid education underneath you, and you work in a sport with a ton of intricacies. And like you pointed out a few times, just real like safety nuances that need to be monitored and taken seriously. So is there something about what you do in your sport, or just in general about the culture of the industry, that you wish more people knew?
Yeah, I would say, at least for me in this specific industry, what I find really frustrating is I'll come across people who call themselves weight cut specialists. And the frustration is really derived from the fact that they don't have any real knowledge or education in the science. And to me, it's not just the science of nutrition, it's understanding, like, you have to understand human physiology pretty extensively. We have to understand, the body's sweat responses, the hormones involved in that, how that goes down, understanding how the body metabolizes nutrients at different exercise intensities. We have to understand what happens under conditions of extreme caloric restriction and how that affects metabolism, hormones, testosterone levels, also like calorie deficits, what that does, how to implement nutrient timing. So yeah, I get frustrated when people don't have a true expertise in the specifics of everything that's being involved. So a lot of time these weight cut specialists, they come in and they put them on one calorie deficit. That's the other thing. People think that they need to eat like a bird, and I'm trying to get them to change that. Like, they already routinely think that they have to eat nothing on a daily basis to lose weight, and I'm trying to get them to realize that they need to eat more to kind of prevent that, everything that happens with low energy availability. So my biggest frustration is, yeah, people that come in that put them on these ridiculous diets that they don't need to be on, and they're hurting them more than they're helping them. And they really don't know how to guide a weight cut. They don't know how to prep their body appropriately to lose that weight acutely. And they don't emphasize to them either the importance of losing body fat or targeting specific weight loss early on in camp. So, last minute, you're not putting yourself at high risk.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And as I mentioned to you before, I'll say it again, I just can't thank you enough for bringing into the discussion low energy availability and REDS. I think it's a nuance of sport performance that impacts all athletes, especially those that you work with, but there's still a lot of coaches and nutrition pros who don't really know enough about it. And so we have a masterclass from a few months ago on it if those people want to learn more. And that awesome graphic that you had, I think, is from the IOC position stand. And if people want to look that up, I think can just do a Google search for Margot Montjoy, who's like the primary author on it. And it's very easy to read. And so everybody listening should learn more about that for sure. So thank you for including that. Okay, a couple more questions. You mentioned adherence and compliance and just getting the struggle of getting athletes to both adhere to some of the food suggestions you might be giving them and supplement use. Wondering if you have any tricks of the trade just from a coaching standpoint that could help with adherence and compliance when it comes to changes in food intake that you might be asking them to do, or just starting supplements or taking supplements at certain times around the like training schedule that you mentioned.
Okay, so we're talking about how to get them to adhere better. That's the question?
Yes.
Okay. That's always tricky. Anything that you can tell them that they can have as much as they want of. So when I was referring back to the essential aminos and the protein powders, they love to hear that there's like, oh my God, there's no limit. Like, oh, that's great. Like, so they love to hear that. Anything that, outside of that, it's difficult because every athlete is different. Sometimes it's literally like, you tell them, hey, you bring them the supplement, or you send it to them and you're like, you need to put that in your training bag. Like it needs to be in a spot where you see it every day and I need you to take it at this time. Sometimes it's about, maybe you have to like little white lie to them a little bit or like over exaggerate what it's going to do to get them to be like, oh yeah, this is good. Like I need this. So from a recovery standpoint, like I just sometimes try and emphasize the benefits that they're going to get. And usually the adherence comes from something that they can always feel happening. But obviously not every supplement they're going to get that. So it's really just kind of about pinpointing, at least to that specific person, what's important to them, and the relationship that you have. So it's kind of a difficult question. So I would say my personal tricks of the trade are, one, if it's something they can have as much as they want of whenever they want and it tastes good, they're definitely going to do it. Two, kind of, pinpointing what their motivation is. And three, threatening them. You got to, I just threaten all of them. You got to do it. There's no if, ands, or buts. There's no discussion. You got to do it or I'm not working with you.
Those are all valid and perfect, perfect coaching point. Okay, great. Just a couple more if you're okay. 2 more questions. Is that okay? Okay, great. One from Jose. What is your opinion on the effects of BPC 157? What is your opinion on the effects of BPC 157 that it has on water manipulation?
BPP, did he write that out or is that just an abbreviation?
Yeah, BPC. I'm not sure if that's Jose, if you want to drop in some more color around that. I'm thinking it's maybe a peptide, or BPC
7 or 147.
157 he has in here.
Okay, it says a peptide derived from human gastric juice has been demonstrated to promote healing of different tissues. I don't see anything about. Oh, well, here we go. This is why I don't even know about it, because it's banned by the World Anti-Doping Agency, and the U.S. Anti-Doping. Yeah, so anything that's banned, what?
There you go. That's a simple answer.
Yeah, simple answer, it's banned. So don't use it, don't care for it. When it comes to anything that, honestly, cutting weight in general, I don't use any agents that are diuretics in any sense, because I don't like, we're already putting the body under so much stress from fight week anyways. I mean, honestly, everyone thinks the weight cut is the night before. The weight cut starts at the beginning of fight week. That's the reality of the situation, because we're depleting carbs, we're depleting water, we're depleting sodium, we're already reducing water storage in the body so significantly, and again, they're already like really depleted, and now they have to undergo another really stressful response. So the last thing that we want to do is throw something into the mix that's now going to mess up any hormonal response from like the kidneys and adrenal glands that are going to affect any sweating responses in that sense. So I personally, I don't touch diuretics. I don't touch anything that can have any sort of influence on that system. And I don't ever have to, because honestly, everything that I do with my athletes from day one up until that weight cut and fight day, we execute like to a T perfectly, and their sweat response are always really great. And so I think it's just all about training the body to get ready for that moment. So kind of going back to that heat acclimation point, you know, we're training like how you're training for an entire camp to get ready for your fight. Well, I'm also going to be training you to get your body for the cut because that's a really important part of it. So yeah, when it comes to supplements to help with all of that, I personally, I don't touch them. So because of that, I don't really research them either. If someone brings it up to me, I go, yep, nope, you don't need that.
Yeah, that was a huge takeaway for me in your talk, that you're training that heat acclimation, you're training them to be a good sweater, I think you said, which again, I don't work in combat sport, but that was just like made a ton of sense and answers that question beautifully. And it should showcase to everyone on board that and listening that, you know, you have to be an expert at what you do. I mean, that's, you know, why you are so good at what you do. You're preemptively planning that in advance, and it makes complete sense. That's amazing. Last question kind of ties into that, what you were just saying, just regarding the stress that these athletes are under. I mean, they're under a lot of physical stress because of the type of training and just the nature of the sport they're in. They're under a lot of psychological stress, you know, just because of the weight and the fights. And then the additional physiological stress for weight cutting. Do you do any sort of additional testing? Someone wanted to know, like adrenal stress hormone testing or any sort of other testing outside of maybe some of the nutrient deficiencies, vitamin D, et cetera, with your athletes?
I try to as much as I can. I will be honest, just from a private practice standpoint, funds aren't always available, or I might not have a connection with somebody to be able to test those metrics. I mean, really easy things. A lot of these guys and girls, they have the Aura Ring, you know, the Fitbit, or what's the other one on that you wear on your wrist?
The Whoop.
Whoop, there you go, the Whoop. Yeah, so we can kind of use these metrics. So if they ever have that, it's not like I force them to get it, and like I'm not going to expense that for them because those things can be expensive. But if they have that, I do have them share that with me on a daily basis. From time to time, if they do have heart rate monitors, I even just have them put on heart rate monitors. And so I can kind of see, you know, heart rate variability, responses to training, how long it takes them to recover. One thing that we've been doing lately, I started doing because of Charles Stoll. He's one of the main dietitians at the Performance Institute. He's talking about measuring heart rate responses and heart rate variability during the weight cut. And so that's something that when I get them to heat acclimate a couple times, I will try and have them wear a heart rate monitor during that process to see what their response is to being in that hot environment, and, you know, and sweat losses over time. And we do know that as plasma volume decreases, your heart rate's going to increase, you know, to help with the blood flow. And by doing that, we can kind of you can start to pinpoint for each individual kind of what their like max tolerance is when you're doing a weight cut for a session. So for example, a weight cut session will be like, you know, maybe 10 to 15 minutes time, but maybe as they start to get more dehydrated, now like their body's having a harder time tolerating that hot environment. So they reach their like peak of tolerance maybe at 10 minutes now or 8 minutes. So then we have to do shorter sessions and longer rest periods. So that's something, you know, now that I've kind of tried to start looking at. But yeah, as far as measuring everything, unfortunately, a lot of the times it's just verbal communication, which they do lie about, frankly, all the time. So that's why I like to have to physically be there and watch them during training, so I can see for myself and talk to their coaches like, hey, how have they been looking? You know, is training going good? Do they look strong? And it's a lot more subjective, unfortunately, for me. But anytime I can get my hands on testing other metrics, I definitely try to.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to pop back on just to say goodbye to everybody. First, Jackie, I want to thank you. We know at Designs for Sport the amount of time it takes for people to put together a presentation or share their time with our community. So thank you so much. I think one thing that always rings true for us, especially what we do, is that mastering the basics in any facet of work you do in the performance industry is key. We can all get a little distracted sometimes by the shiny objects, which are super fun and help push the industry forward. And I think really what you showcase is just, an amazing level of expertise in what the really important core fundamental things you need to know to work with a combat athlete. So thank you so much for beautifully displaying that to everybody that joined, and everybody's going to watch this in the future. For all of you who were on live, thank you so much for taking your time. This will live on our site. Hopefully it'll be up by about the end of next week, so you can share it with any colleagues that you think would love to check it out. Even people that are new, or veterans, I think it's always a good reminder to just, hear from other people so that we all stay sharp. We love the quote, "A rising tide floats all boats." So we're here to just kind of support everybody in all the facets that they do work in the industry. Until next month, when we start promoting our next guest, we wish everybody a great month. Stay well hydrated, stay well rested. Please reach out to us if we can do anything to support your business. And Jackie, thank you so much. Everybody, please reach out to Jackie at the contact information that she gave at the Fight Nutritionist on social if you're not following her, and her email. Thank you again, Jackie, so much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Bye, everybody.